All right, Joe. Y'all ready?
Yes.
Okay, so recall that I said last week that we were going to embark upon the basic teachings of New Thought, Ancient Wisdom, but there was a couple of things that I had to take care of before we could do that. The first thing I did last week, and that was a talk on the three faces of God. This week we're going to talk about something called the kingdoms of consciousness, or the kingdoms of co-creation. I really want to give credit where credit is due here in terms of the origins of this information. Unfortunately, there seems to be a debate about it, so I'm going to give you both of the reports. Some of this is attributed to Michael Beckwith, and some of it is attributed to a pair of ministers named Marcia Sutton and Lloyd Strong, and they have a website called sacreddays.org. So if you find that this information resonates with you, or that you want to know more about it, that'll give you something to search for. Okay, so something on the point of departure here, the four kingdoms of co-creation, or the four kingdoms of consciousness. I want to let y'all know that I'm going to spend a very little bit of time in Kingdom 1, and the reason for that is because if you're here, your center of gravity is not in Kingdom 1. You may have flare-ups there, but I promise you your center of gravity is not there. I'm going to spend most of my time on Kingdoms 2 and 3, and there's really nothing we can say about Kingdom 4 because it's a non-dual state. So anytime I talk about the non-dual, remember what happens? The limitations of language put me outside of it. So it's a state of isness that you can experience, but it's really challenging to talk about. All right. So Kingdom 1. Oh, one more thing I want to tell you before I launch into the kingdoms. I'm sure you've heard the phrases, there's religious and there's secular, right? And one of the sort of commentaries about psychology and psychological work is that it's secular, and that's often hurled at them by rather fundamental people who think it's a waste of time. I want to tell you that I think psychology and spirituality are one continuum. And so I will most of the time refer to that as the psycho-spiritual continuum. And here's why I think that. You have to have a sense of self, which is what psychology helps you with, before you can transcend the self. Otherwise, you just skip it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Right? So you have to develop a sense of who you are before you can self-transcend. If you skip that, we call that a bypass. Okay, so psycho-spiritual continuum. All right, now we're going to get started. So Kingdom 1, life is happening to me. Life is happening to me. Otherwise known as victim consciousness. I hate to use that word because everybody goes, eee. That is when, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's life is happening to you. If something happens, it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. You didn't participate in it. And you are a passive recipient of the life experience that is dealt to you from elsewhere. Now, the plus side of Kingdom 1, number one, it's appropriate for somebody Micah's age. It's appropriate for children. Life is kind of happening to you, right? Another plus about it is that nothing's your fault. At least that's what you think, right? So life is happening to you, and anything that's great or horrible, you take no responsibility for. Of course, the downside of this is, well, it's the obvious. You don't have any choice. You don't have any freedom. And you don't feel very good. So what I thought I'd do to illustrate these points, instead of telling you a story or reading something, is actually give you a sample of what prayer looks like from each of these kingdoms. All right? So I'm going to give you, now this is not definitive, this is the way I approach it from each of these kingdoms. And I hope I don't insult anybody. Okay, so Kingdom 1 prayer. God in heaven, I know that you are in control of my life. I know that you give me experiences so that you would have me learn the gifts of the Spirit, humility, praise of you, acceptance of your Son. I humbly offer myself and I submit to the lessons you teach. Amen. Kingdom 1 prayer. How many of y'all want to pray that with me? It was everything I could do to get it out. I grew up Catholic, so all the prayers we said were sort of rote. So I've never actually prayed a Kingdom 1 prayer. You could. Hopefully it'll get better. I have more experience with these next ones. Okay, so something happens when you're living in that place. If you are gifted, graced, or stumble upon the opportunity to say, I'm mad as hell, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I'm not living like this anymore. You have just entered the portal of personal responsibility and now have the possibility of moving into Kingdom 2. Okay, so whereas in Kingdom 1, life was happening to me, now I'm in Kingdom 2 and life is happening by me. I am the master of my destiny. I have awakened to my sense of self, my personal responsibility. I'm taking the bull by the horns. I know that my true identity is as God, and I am going to speak my word and change my life. This is a hugely powerful place to be, right? Because when you've lived in that Kingdom 1 for a while, and you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you swing the pendulum. And now you're like, I'm on fire with myself, and I am going to do this, right? And so, this is typically when, as we remember, I'm giving you this information because I really want you to have it before we look at the basics of New Thought. So, you're going to hear me talk in the next 6 weeks or so, and you're going to hear me use the word law. Well, law is a very Kingdom 2 statement. It is done unto me as I believe. I speak my word into the law, and the law of life outpictures whatever the word I speak is. Great example of Kingdom 2 thought is the movie The Secret, right? That's like Kingdom 2 on steroids, right? So now not only are you creating your own life through the use of your word, you actually have quantum physics on your side. It's pretty far out there, but okay. So that's a great example. Remember, this is absolutely necessary if you're coming out of a place where you feel powerless. Absolutely necessary. The beauty of it is you get this sense of empowerment. You get this sense that you can self-actualize and that you can actually live your dreams or change the circumstances of your life. And it works. So let me give you an example of prayer from Kingdom 2. Now, I'm switching over. The prayer that I said before was really what they call a prayer of supplication. It's when you're asking, right? So now the prayers from Kingdom 2 and 3, these are what we would call affirmative prayers. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the next little while. Okay, so do me a favor, close your eyes. Let my words be your words, and I want you to just sense where in your body this is hitting you. There is one mind, and that mind is infinite, powerful, and everywhere present. That mind is my mind now. Everything that God is, I am, because I am the allness of God expressing as me. I know that universal mind is a law that responds to my thoughts and manifests my life according to my word. Therefore I speak my word with authority and the knowledge that it shall not return unto me void. I know that the wisdom of omnipotent mind is present and acting in every cell of the system of my body because my body is God's body. The perfect blueprint for health is mine now, and I claim it. There is no room for thoughts of error manifesting as the flesh of my body because God has no opposing power, and therefore nothing opposes my health. Because the life of God is my life now, I am healthy. I now release this claim into the law of mind, knowing that it is done unto me as I believe. I am grateful for the awareness of my own power as the very presence of God itself. And so it is. Does everybody get the feeling of that? I mean, I'm in charge here. I am in charge. This is a beautiful thing. But I wouldn't recommend that you completely build a house there, right? Because when you take this to the extreme, I'll give you a great example of what happens when you take this to the extreme. When Hurricane Katrina hit, I was sitting as part of my ministerial training. No, I was a practitioner at the time. Okay, so I was taking a foundations class, which is the basic class that teaches the basic philosophy of what we teach. And Hurricane Katrina hit, and so we had class the next Monday night, and there was a heaviness and a concern in the room. And the conversation that erupted, that I'm sorry to say was actually initiated by the teacher, was, what did the people of New Orleans do to cause this? And the person teaching the class had a predominant belief that that's what caused it. That they had told themselves a story about living in a bowl and being susceptible and the levees and the dams. And it was everything I could do to just get through that conversation. Because this can be taken to an extreme, right? So now we're responsible for everything, right? And then anything that happens, you get rear-ended, it rains on your wedding day, all of these things, you have to ask yourself, what did I do to create this? What did I do to create this? Right? Well, what happens when you do that enough? You start to condemn yourself. You replace the guilt of the faith of your childhood with the guilt of new thought. Not only that, but because you're operating on the belief that everyone else is also creating their life 100%, you are completely void of compassion, right? Because if you're having a crappy day, then I'm going to look at you and think, well, what did you do to create that? Anybody ever had that said to them? Yeah. Well, you have my permission to walk rapidly away from anybody who says that to you in a flippant way outside of the context of a heart-to-heart conversation. Because sometimes you don't. You just don't. Life happens. We often do something that creates, promotes, or allows things to happen, but we don't cause everything. Now, I want to speak a word of gratitude that this kingdom of consciousness exists, because part of New Thought got its roots at a time when people were dying of tuberculosis. And so a couple of fellas figured out that they didn't have to accept what the doctor said, that they could actually do something to promote their own healing. Right? And then a couple of women as well. Well, that's a big deal when you can be on your own side. But there's a very big difference between accepting responsibility for what's yours to be responsible for and taking it so far that you're now responsible for natural disasters and the guy that rear-ends you on coming off the freeway. Now, as an aside, I will say, if you've been rear-ended 5 or 6 times in a couple of months, you might want to look at that. That's called a pattern. You might have a part. But if not, you know what? You got rear-ended. You're not responsible necessarily. All right. So what happens to get us from kingdom 2 to kingdom 3? We're speaking our word for something. We are in charge of our lives. and we are diligent about our affirmative prayer, and we are guarding our mental house so that no negativity gets in, and it's still not working. I'm going to use Michael and I as an example here. The example here is that baby is a 5-year dream. And we were speaking our word, and 25 other people were speaking their word for us. Right? And it wasn't shipping. Okay, and that throws you into questions about whether or not the story you've been telling yourself is true. Right? And if you stick with it, you must find a new place to stand. You either walk away and say, that's crap, it doesn't work, or you find a new place to stand. So the portal to get from Kingdom 2 to Kingdom 3 is surrender. What are we surrendering? Well, that's a really good question, because I'm tempted to say we surrender to God, and that's actually true. But it's not the God of Kingdom 1. It's not the God out there, so we have to go deeper and discern a little bit more about what it is that I'm surrendering to. Right? And everybody has to answer that for themselves. I think that there is a deep driving goodness in creation, and I often surrender to that. I surrender to the co-creation that I know is the dance of the divine and Chris Terry, where sometimes I'm leading and sometimes I'm following. I surrender to that. Mostly what I'm surrendering away from is the false perception of my personal omnipotence. And I'm surrendering to the idea that I am a part of God, but I am not all that God is. And so all that I am is God, but I'm not all that God is. I'm realizing that I forgot something, and I'm wondering if it's important. Okay. So the beauty of being in this place of Kingdom 3 is that you start to feel a sense of harmony and flow, really like you're dancing. And it's not clear who's leading and who's following, and in those moments, actually, there's no leader and follower, it's just the dance. And the gifts of Kingdom 3 are that because we have a renewed understanding of this, we can all of a sudden not only shower love on ourselves, but on other people, right? Because we get that there is personal responsibility, but we also get that we're all on the journey, we're all dancing, there's something bigger, and that seems to just sort of, I don't know, there's something relaxes. You know, that Kingdom 2 thing, that very driving, I'm in charge, you can get tired. Whereas Kingdom 3, there's a sense of being carried. And I don't mean like footprints on the beach carried kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. You're swept along in a current. How's that? Right? And you're still swimming. You know, you can go this way, you can go this way, but you're moving with something. Does that make sense? You know, I was trying this morning to think about what's the downside of this Kingdom 3? And what I came to is it really has to do with its paradox. Because when you have your center of gravity in Kingdom 3, what you realize is that you are 100% responsible for your life. And you can't control everything. Right? And this forces you into a place of spiritual and emotional maturity. Right? How do I take responsibility in the face of powerlessness? How do I accept less than acceptable circumstances? and still be okay. So the challenge, if there is a challenge in this place, there's a couple. It's heartbreaking sometimes, but your heart breaks open so that you can feel that sense of compassion for yourself and others. And the second thing is, it can feel like a lot of work at times, because what it involves, there's no rules about it, right? So before, if something was going wrong, it wasn't my fault. Then in Kingdom 2, if something's going wrong, it is my fault. In Kingdom 3, what's required and called for over and over again is discernment. What is my part here? What is my responsibility? And where do I need to surrender? Right? And frankly, that's just, it's not as easy as having the answers be either this or this, because answers are and. So let me give you an example of a prayer from Kingdom 3. You close your eyes if you like and notice where it hits you. There is one life, one love, one powerful expression of the divine. God is all that there is, and all of life is an expression of that oneness. God is wisdom, peace, and beauty itself. God is divine right order, perfect purpose, and infinite good. In God I live and move and have my being. There is no separation, and I am living the dance of the divine. It flows through me as me, but is so much more than me. In this moment, I align myself with this infinite power that is God, and I allow it to have its way with me. Because there are no errors in God, I know that there is no wrong choice for my future. The infinite speaks to and as me, and is the wisdom that inspires my every thought, word, and deed as I make choices about the next chapter in my life. I know the perfect presence of Spirit illumines my path and speaks to me in intuition. Its wisdom is everywhere, and I am open to receive it. I surrender to my highest good and the perfect pattern of joy and purpose that expresses as me. And I am so grateful to know that there is an infinite good and that I am living my life within it. I know this is true, and it was true before I spoke these words, because there is no separation or time in God, only the eternal now. I release, I let go, and so it is. You feel the difference? Yes, ma'am, I can. In fact, I'll just hand this to you.
Facebook page.
Facebook page. Okay. So I want to go back and say, because, let's see. I don't want to do a show of hands, never mind. You feel that. It has a very different energy, does it not? Very different. And I was talking with somebody earlier. I had a health challenge about 6-7 years ago. And they told me I was going to have MS, and it was, this big ugly thing. And I said, oh, hell no. Hell no. I'm not doing that. I'm not living that way. Right? I'm not going to sit in Kingdom 3 at that moment. By God, I am claiming something for myself, and when I claimed it for myself, I called everybody I knew and said, claim this for me. Because I was not going to live there. So there's a time and a place, and the beauty and discernment of Kingdom 3 allows me to say what's called for right now. Acceptance or action. And so there really is a tool for every job. So I've presented these kingdoms as like sort of fixed stages, but the truth of the matter is that we are all in every stage. I might be in complete, manifesting mode around my finances, but my spouse just can't get it right, and if he could, it'd be fine, right? So in relationships, I might be hanging around Kingdom 1. If you just do it right, my life would be good. But in money, it might just sort of fly out of my pockets. So what I don't want you to walk away from this thinking is that you're in a fixed place. What I do want you to understand is that everybody has a center of gravity from which they predominantly operate at any age or stage of life. And I'll say it again, there is no wrong one. See, one of the big risks about standing up and presenting stages of anything, what do we want to do with that? Right, you want to jump to the end. Like, well, I'll be over that stage right there because that's closer to the finish line, you know? And so it's really easy to start looking at, like, how do I make myself move faster? Well, you can't, right? The whole thing about stages is you don't skip them. They can shorten, but you can't skip them. What I want you to walk away from this morning knowing is that where you're at is okay. And I promise you, if you will continue to suit up and show up and commit, even if it's just in thought, to your own spiritual path, you will find yourself walking through these stages. It's inevitable, right? The only wrong place to be is the place you think you're going to be permanently. And that's why my job as host or minister or whatever you want to call me is to understand whether or not you need to be disturbed or comforted at your current location, right? Because we can't all drive all the time, right? We're not rushing through these things. But we can't just land somewhere and stay there. So if you've landed somewhere, don't let me get a hold of that because I'll poke you and prod you with it. And if I see that you're sort of bruised from the journey, then my job is to comfort you around it. It's the job of all of us to do that for each other. I want to leave you with a reading. Actually, it's a poem. And it, in one way, has nothing to do with the topic. And in one way, it has everything to do with the topic. Brad, I'm going to invite you up. And we'll start doing that thing you do. This is called Live the Question, and it's by R.M. Roca. I want to beg you as much as I can, dear sir, to be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So let's just take a moment to celebrate the journey itself. And to know that everything that I've said today makes not one whit of difference. Because like the Wizard of Oz, we are all already home. We never left Kansas. And yet there is that of God and of us that shows up and grows up in time, just as there is that of ourselves that is eternal and changeless. But it is in this realm of the finite where we show up and grow up and things change and we change and grow, that we have the opportunity for all these experiences. Deep joy, deep joy. Powerful sorrow. The ability to love others and to find compassion for our own imperfections. After all, there is no place, there is no point on the journey, whether resting or moving, that the power and presence of Spirit itself is not active. And so in the space between the thoughts, we are resting in God. And in the thoughts and words and actions themselves, we are moving in God. We know it, we claim it, we just allow it to be enough for this day. And finally, let us grace the people that we come into contact with this week, knowing that they are the way that God is showing up and growing up in their own lives. And we can love them and bless their journey too.